Her hand found mine on the counter before I'd even sat down, and she squeezed it like I was the only warm thing left in a cold world. I want you to picture this. A diner in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. Snow coming down sideways outside the windows, the power flickering, and a woman maybe 75, years old, grabbing a total stranger's hand and saying, "Lily, oh thank God, Lily, you came." I had never seen this woman in my life, and somehow, in the space of one sentence, I had become somebody's granddaughter. Let me back up first, because you need to know who I was before that hand grabbed mine, so you understand why I didn't pull away. My name is Wren Calloway. I'm 28 years old, and until 11 days ago, I sold irrigation equipment to family farms across 3 states. It's not a glamorous job. Nobody at a party has ever lit up when I told them what I do. I drive a lot of back roads. I know a frightening amount about soil moisture sensors, and I am, by every measure that matters in this world, easy to overlook. That's not self-pity. That's just the shape of my whole life. The reliable one, the one who shows up early and never causes a scene and gets thanked with a nod instead of a name. 11 days ago, my company gave the regional manager position. I'd worked 4 years to a man who'd been there 11 months. Because, and I quote, "he has a spark the clients respond to." 6 days ago, my boyfriend of 2 years told me he was moving to Denver with a woman from his climbing gym because, and I quote again, "life with you is safe, Wren, and I don't want safe anymore." I packed my car the next morning and started driving home for Christmas alone, because it turns out when you're the safe one, nobody chases the car down the driveway. That's who I was when a blizzard shut down the interstate and forced me into a diner outside of town I'd never heard of, and a stranger looked at me across the room and started to cry. Before I tell you what happened in that diner, if you've ever felt like the overlooked one, the steady one nobody fights to keep, stay with me, because I promise this story is for you. Tap subscribe if you want more of these, because this channel is full of ordinary people who turned out to matter more than anyone told them they did. And I don't want you to miss the next one. Okay, back to the booth. The old woman was still holding my hand when a waitress, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes named Rosa, pulled me gently by the elbow toward the coffee station and whispered fast into my ear, "I am so sorry. That's Dot Prescott. Her husband Earl is in the booth by the window, and his heart is failing. He's got maybe weeks, and their granddaughter, Lily, died in a car accident 3 years ago, and they never told him. His heart couldn't take it. The doctors said any real shock could kill him on the spot, so the family's been sending him letters for 3 years, pretending Lily's still out there, still just too busy to visit. And honey, you look exactly like her. Same hair, same build, same way of holding your shoulders." Dot's not confused. She's desperate. Earl doesn't have long, and she wants him to see Lily's face one more time before he goes, so he doesn't leave this world thinking she abandoned him. I stood there in a diner in a snowstorm holding a coffee pot. I didn't remember picking up, and I understood with total clarity that I was being asked to become a dead girl for a dying man, and that a total stranger's broken heart was now sitting in my hands. A careful person says no. A careful person says I'm so sorry for your loss and finds a different booth. That's the woman my ex-boyfriend called too safe to keep. Maybe that's exactly why, for the first time in years, I didn't do the careful thing. I walked to the window booth, where Dot was already crying quietly, and where an old man with an oxygen line under his nose and eyes the pale gray blue of a Nebraska winter sky was staring at me like I'd walked out of his own memory. "Hi, Grandpa," I said. My voice barely held. Earl Prescott's whole face came apart with joy. "There she is," he said, so soft I almost didn't hear it over the wind against the glass. "There's my girl." He reached both hands across the table, and I took them. And I sat down across from a man I had known for 11 seconds, and became the most important person in the world to him. Here's the thing nobody warns you about a lie like that. It doesn't stay a performance for long. Dot sat beside Earl, gripping a paper napkin to shreds under the table where he couldn't see, feeding me tiny lifelines whenever I stalled. "Tell your grandfather about the apartment," she'd murmur, and I'd invent an apartment. Tell him about the winters out west, and I'd invent winters. Earl asked if I was still doing the thing with my hands, the way I used to fold napkins into cranes as a kid at this very diner. And without thinking, I picked up my napkin and folded it, badly, into something crane-shaped, purely on instinct. And Earl laughed so hard he had to catch his breath on the oxygen. And Dot looked at me across the table like I'd performed a miracle instead of a coincidence. 40 minutes in, the diner door opened, and a gust of snow came in with a man in his 50s, tall, exhausted, still in a work coat, And the second his eyes found me, his whole body went rigid. Rosa had called him. This, it turned out, was Grant Prescott, Earl's son and Lily's father, the man who had buried his daughter 3 years ago, and never once let his own father know. Grant did not sit down. Grant stood at the end of the booth with his jaw tight and said, in a voice pitched, just low enough for his father not to hear over the diner's chatter, "Who exactly are you, and what do you think you're doing?" I could have panicked. I could have confessed, right there, and let the whole fragile thing collapse in front of a dying man. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and said the only true thing I had. "I'm someone the storm brought in tonight, and I'm asking you to give me 1 hour before you decide whether I'm a problem or a mercy. Your mother didn't plan this. I didn't plan this. It happened, and your father is happier right now than your mother. Says she's seen him in 3 years. You can end it the second I stand up. I'm asking you not to end it yet." Grant looked past me at his father, who was beaming, holding his wife's hand across the table, telling a story about a fishing trip nobody but a real family would remember. And something in Grant's face cracked. He didn't sit, but he didn't stop it either. He walked to the counter, ordered coffee he never drank, and watched. That was as close to permission as I was going to get. 20 minutes later, he almost caught me anyway. He came back to the booth, sat on the edge, and asked, casual as a man defusing a bomb, "Lily, what was the name of that dog you had at Grandpa's? The one that used to sleep under the porch?" I felt the whole table go still. Dot's hand froze on her napkin. This was the trap Mina would have laid, dressed up as small talk. A detail a real granddaughter would carry in her bones and a stranger could never guess. I had nothing. I had no dog, no porch, no answer. So I did the only thing I could. I laughed, easy, like it was a joke between us. "Grant, you know I never remember that dog's name. I've been getting it wrong since I was 9. Ask Mom. She used to tease me about it every Thanksgiving." I turned to Earl. "Grandpa, help me out here. You always remember it and I always forget." Earl chuckled, delighted, and supplied a name, Scout, and told the whole story himself. And I nodded along like I'd heard it 100 times. And Grant sat back slowly, and something like grudging respect passed over his face, the same look a suspicious mother gives, a man who's just proven he can think on his feet under pressure. Near the end of that first hour, Earl did the thing that changed everything. His hands were shaking with the effort, but he worked a ring off his own finger, a plain gold band, worn thin as paper from 50 years on the same hand, and he reached across the table and pressed it into my palm. "Your grandmother's mother's ring," he said. "I've been carrying it in my coat pocket for 3 years, waiting for you to come home, so I could put it in your hand myself instead of leaving it to strangers in a will. Now I don't have to wait anymore." His eyes were wet. "Now I can rest easy, knowing you'll have it." I looked down at 50 years of somebody's whole life sitting in my hand, meant for a girl who had been gone 3 years, and I understood in that instant the exact size of what I was holding. It wasn't a lie anymore. It was a blessing aimed at a target that didn't exist. And I was standing in the way of it, and I did not know how to give it back without breaking the very heart it was trying to heal. I felt the confession rising in my throat, the need to set it all down and tell this good dying man the truth. And Dot must have seen it happening on my face, because her hand found mine under the table, hard, and her eyes said one word without her mouth ever moving. "Please." So I closed my fingers around the ring and I said, "Thank you, Grandpa. I'll wear it every day." And I meant the promise more than I had any right to. The plows cleared the highway before midnight. I had to go. Earl held my face in both his hands at the door. The way you'd hold something you were afraid was made of glass. And he said, "You come home again soon. You hear me? Don't you dare make it 3 more years." And I promised him I wouldn't. And it was the only lie I told that whole night that I already knew. Somewhere in my chest, I intended to make true. I sat in my car in the diner parking lot afterward, and I could not stop shaking. Dot came out into the snow without a coat and got in the passenger seat, and we sat there together. 2 strangers who had just built an hour of impossible grace out of nothing. "I have to give the ring back," I said. "This is insane. I have to drive back in there and tell him the truth." "You will do no such thing," Dot said, fierce for a small woman. "You gave my husband the best hour he has had in 3 years. He asked me tonight, for the first time since Lily died, whether he could die happy. Do you understand what you gave him? That is not a crime. Wren, that is the kindest thing anyone has done for this family since we buried our granddaughter, and I will not let you take it back from either of us. I told her about the job I'd lost 11 days ago, and the man who'd called me too safe to love 6 days ago, and how I had spent this entire drive home feeling like a woman nobody in the world would fight to keep. And an 80-year-old widow-to-be looked at me in a snowed-in parking lot and said, "Then you and I found each other on the exact right night. Because I have spent 3 years watching the world overlook the people who actually show up. And tonight the world sent me one anyway." I did not disappear after that night. I told myself I would, that it was safer, cleaner, that a stranger playing a dead girl had no business, staying in a grieving family's life. But Dot called me 2 days later and I answered, and we talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything. She called again the next week. Grant called the week after that, gruff and awkward, to say his father had been asking after Lily, and did I think I could visit? Just once more, before the roads got bad again. I drove back out to that diner every few weeks for the next 2 months. Earl never once suspected. He grew weaker and gentler. In every visit he told me one more story I hadn't heard, filling in a life that had never actually been mine, until it started to feel strangely like it was. Earl Prescott died on a Tuesday in February with Dot's hand in his, and, though I didn't know it until later, with the ring's twin, the matching band Dot herself still wore, pressed against his own chest. I drove out for the funeral. Grant met me at the church doors, and before I could say anything, he pulled me into a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me and said into my shoulder, "He died thinking his girl came home. Do you have any idea what you gave my family?" I spent 3 years watching. My father grieved someone he thought was just too busy to visit. You gave him an ending instead of a wound. I will never be able to repay that. And I stopped trying to figure out how weeks ago. Afterward at the house, Dot pulled me aside and told me the last thing Earl ever said to her, 2 nights before he passed. He'd told her he always knew, somewhere underneath the joy, that the girl in the booth that snowy night carried herself a little differently than as Lily used to. Not colder, just different, the way a person is different from a memory. But he said he'd decided a long time ago that some questions aren't worth asking if the answer might cost you the last good months you have left, and that whoever she really was, she had shown up for an old dying man on the worst night of a snowstorm and given him back his family, and that was a kind of granddaughter too, in the only way that ever really mattered. I still wear the ring, not as Lily, as Wren, the woman a dying man chose to spend his last good months believing in, sight unseen, faults and all. Here's what I understand now that I didn't understand 11 days into the worst month of my life. The people who call you too safe, too steady, too easy to leave behind, they are not seeing you clearly. They are dazzled by the version of a person who is loud about showing up instead of the version who simply does it. Earl Prescott looked at a total stranger for 1 hour in a diner booth and felt more love than some people feel in a lifetime. Not because I was exciting, but because I stayed exactly as long as he needed someone to. I think about that snowstorm all the time. About the man who found me too boring to fight for, and the dying man who held my face like I was the answer to a 3-year prayer. One of them was wrong about me. I know which one now. If a stranger ever grabbed your hand and mistook you for someone they loved and needed, desperately, and you had the chance to give them 1 hour of peace, would you have taken it the way I did? Or would you have pulled your hand back and kept walking to your own booth, safe and unremarkable and untouched? There's no wrong answer. There's only the one you'd have to carry. If this one got you, even a little, do me a small kindness and tap that like button. It helps this find the next person who needs it tonight. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because I'm here every week with one more true feeling story about the quiet ones the world keeps underestimating, right up until the moment they turn out to be exactly who was needed. Stay warm out there. I'm glad you stayed for this one.